fracking, I love this title. Actually, I wish I could claim it. I know it's a fairly common misconception, but Isaac actually suggested this to me. Will it make my water start on fire? That's kind of a fun way to introduce the subject. But if you've been watching the news lately, actually for the last several months, it's astounding what America has done with energy production. There are articles out there, as I mentioned in the email to you guys, suggesting that the U.S. will surpass Saudi Arabia and be the world's leading producer of petroleum products within a few months, by next year, somewhere in there. It's pretty amazing that this has happened. And the production output is doubling, I forget how often, every couple of years or something, I don't know. This guy here will tell us about it. So there's some really interesting breakthroughs that have huge implications economically. But there's the questions. There's the movies out there like Gasland, which shows that fracking does cause your water to start on fire, or so it would seem, or so they claim. So to help us kind of deal with that, as well as talk about some home issues as well, Wisconsin doesn't have any fracking mines, but we are the largest producer of fracking sand, the sand that's used to fracture the rocks to allow this energy boom to take place. So there's some issues there, environmental concerns and so on, and this is occurring more in the central and western part of the state where these mines are. But I think it's worth us knowing about that. This was in my mind, I was conceiving this as being the part of a series that I wanted to do after the election about things the legislature should be looking at and addressing. I don't know if this fits that quite the way I wanted it to, but it's close enough. So maybe this is the first round in this every so often series on things the legislature should be doing. And that would be to institute some of the sensible policies that Isaac will talk about today. So Isaac Orr is our speaker. He's a researcher and geologist with the Heartland Institute. And I thought it was interesting that he's out of Waupaca, and Joy Pullman with Heartland comes from just, 20 miles more west. I don't know if you know Joy or not.
Yeah.
Okay, her hometown is Amherst.
Oh, I had no idea.
Oh, see?
My mom's from Amherst.
Okay. So the Heartland Institute does pluck talent from the heartland, I guess is what it is. And he's written several articles about energy-related issues and fracking. He had an article in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel just a week ago dealing with frac sand mining. So anyways, he's going to come talk to us about this. He's got a background of being a staffer in the Assembly for a little while, or the Senate rather. I think Frank Lassay's office, wasn't it? And as I derisively put on the announcement, he pretends to be a comedian in his spare time. So with that, join me in welcoming Isaac Orr.
All right, everybody, thanks for coming. Let's give a round of applause to Dave for putting all this together. Appreciate his work on this. I've also got goodies for you guys afterwards, so you don't have to pay for it. Take that, Kristen. This is the 34-page study on fracking that I wrote for Heartland last year. So you guys, full color pictures, all that kind of stuff. So you'll see a lot of it, be a lot of overlap, but just letting you guys know, make sure to grab one of those before you leave if you're interested. So, yep, I'm Isaac Orr, from Waupaca, born and raised, dairy farm, so whole meat and potatoes, Wisconsin stereotype upbringing there. So yeah, I like to talk about geology. The Heartland Institute, where I work, is the well, let's get rid of this thing right here. All right, so we are a think tank from Chicago. I try to go down there as little as possible. I can't stand the fibs. Oh, okay. But yeah, so Libertarian think tank, we focus a lot on energy and environmental issues. We do a lot on the global warming issue. We are the leading think tank when it comes to global warming skepticism. So if you're interested in that, make sure to check out heartland.org so you can get more information. Who am I? I went to college in UW-Eau Claire, right where all the frac sand mining is happening. So I studied political science and geology out there. Authored the 34-page study, and I've been in the Washington Times, The Hill, that sort of thing. So I've been really lucky this last year. It's been really exciting, just kind of like, oh wow, people want to read what I write. So you get paid for this? That was the great thing. Because I'm 26, I look all of 21, maybe. So thanks for coming, because I'm no longer the youngest person here. I thought I would be. We're skewing that average. So yeah, let's. And then I also appear on Breitling Energy's Powering America Radio from time to time. So I'm sure you guys are all on Twitter, so check me out. All right, so fracking is important, hydraulic fracturing, because we're now #1. And I did a talk in Appleton last week. It was the Pachacacha. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. It was the first time I had. It's 20 slides, 20 seconds a slide, so it was very rapid fire. But we're now the #1 producer of oil, natural gas, and as a joke, I put in freedom. But it's actually not so much a joke, because we are more energy independent now than we have been in a really long time. We'll probably never be completely energy independent. We just have too much of a demand for it. But we are more secure in our supply than we have been since, the 1980s. Right now we're producing about 8 or 9 million barrels a day, which is something we haven't done since Reagan was in office. So it's pretty incredible. And the reason this is happening is because we are, I know this is going to sound cliche, but because we have the freedom that we have in the United States. The United States is the only country in the world where everyday people like you and I can own the mineral rights underneath our land. So when you look at the increase in oil production that we've seen here, so we have this dip down here, but we see this increase at the end. And that's 2012. That's continued upwards due to the massive increases in production in Texas and North Dakota, Colorado, Oklahoma. So we have a lot more oil production, but the reason that is because private land. Our oil production on federal lands has decreased a lot because they're not getting the permits that they need in order to go ahead and drill on there. So it's all a private initiative, mineral or energy companies coming in, negotiating with private or individual landowners. And look at this trend. Just down, 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 and then spiking up. And that's all directly correlated to hydraulic fracturing. Now we have natural gas production, kind of a similar story. We surpassed Russia as the leading producer of natural gas a while ago. And one of the reasons that natural gas prices and oil prices are so different is because it's hard to transport natural gas. So we're going to talk about that in a second as well. So the reason this has huge economic implications. So when you have natural gas prices that are widely different in one area compared to another area, that gives them a competitive advantage in a lot of industries like manufacturing, chemicals, fertilizer, which is great for my dad. He's still farming. And so look at this chart. So the United States had energy prices for natural gas that, look at January 2005. We're way above the rest of the developed world. And then right around January 2008, you have the crash of the financial markets, and natural gas prices dipped in the United States, but they never got back up to where they were because we have increased our natural gas production by about twice what we were doing before. So let's look at this is where fracking happens. So you have Marcellus Shale, which is Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, and that's where we're getting a lot of our natural gas. Obviously, you guys have probably heard of the Bakken Formation in North Dakota by now. Huge implications out there. Lowest unemployment rate in the country. Highest per capita income in the country. And you would have never thought that about western North Dakota. Any of you guys go through North Dakota to get to Yellowstone or something like that fairly recently? It's so much different. I used to work in Yellowstone. My sophomore year of college, the summer after that, I went out and worked in the park. I wasn't doing anything glamorous. I was cleaning bathrooms and emptying garbage cans. But you're in the park, so it was really good opportunity. But the town of Dickinson is usually like the last good place. North Dakota is usually the last good place to get gas before you get to Billings, Montana. Some of those towns in between are a little shady, so you fill up there. But that place has grown tremendously. I was just out in North Dakota for the North Dakota Petroleum Council meeting out there, and they've added 2 off-ramps on the interstate, so 2 different exits for a little town, Dickinson. It was about 10,000 people maybe 10 years ago, and now they're saying it's going to balloon up to 40 within the next couple years. They said the town of Dickinson will require 2,500 more acres just to house all the people that they're thinking are going to be coming. They just built the world's largest Menards out in Dickinson, North Dakota, so that's got a little Wisconsin impact. So I guess one day, the boom out there is crazy. There's just apartment buildings are going up faster than you can shake. That analogy wasn't going to work. They're going up really fast. There's a lot of subdivisions going up. Apparently there's a rumor in town that apparently one time a contractor walked into Menards and bought every single 2x4 they had in there. So pretty incredible. So also, back on track here, Eagle Ford in Texas, Barnett Shale is where fracking was essentially invented or perfected as its current iteration. We've been doing hydraulic fracturing since 1947. The first fracked well was in Kansas. So in order to draw a little bit of comparison, we'll move on. Okay, we'll go into this. Look at, this is what we were getting from the same rocks that were getting a massive boom in natural gas and oil. This is how they looked up until 2007. We weren't getting much. So this is a technological breakthrough stimulated by high oil prices. Essentially, well, we're not getting anything out of our conventional wells, our easy access wells. It's the kind of wells that they still drill in Saudi Arabia. But look at this. Natural gas in Texas, Louisiana, and this one right here is really important. It's the Marcellus. That has expanded a lot, and it could expand more, except New York has a moratorium on the practice, and it's really shady in New York because there's a lot of landowners in the Buffalo area. It's all the upstate New York, and that's an area that's economically, they're kind of in the doldrums. A lot of the industry that used to power Buffalo, I mean, Buffalo used to be the most wealthy city in America, and now a lot of the manufacturing, that sort of stuff is left. They're hungry for natural gas development up there, yet it's kind of a case like Illinois where you have a very liberal urban center that kind of dictates policy to the rural areas. I mean, we have that a little bit here in Wisconsin with Milwaukee and Madison, but it's not as extreme as it is obviously in New York and Illinois. So what the frack is it? So that's as close as I'm going to get to saying the F word. So if that's what you're here for, sorry. So this is happening in shale and tight oil plays. And what that means is the rocks that we have learned how to get this oil out of are not very permeable. So the oil and gas can't flow through it very easily, which is why we crack the rocks open. And then we use high pressure with water and sand in order to prop the fissures open. So it's kind of like putting a doorstop in a door when you're moving so you don't have to go grab it and open it back up again. That's my really simple analogy. So, and the reason that fracking is now so important is because we're doing it in vertical or horizontal wells. So before we drill straight down into a very permeable rock. Okay, so the oil and gas could flow pretty easily back into the well, but that's not the case anymore. We just ran out of those easy deposits. So what we'll do is we'll drill down and then we'll curve the well over to a horizontal thing in order to increase the well's exposure to the good rocks, the rocks with all the oil and gas. So we perfected that technology with computer programs that help kind of identify, they call it the target formation. So that's been probably one of the biggest breakthroughs. We're just far more sophisticated with our drilling. They say they can hit a dime. I don't know if I believe that, but it wouldn't surprise me. So what's Wisconsin's role? We actually have a big one, and we provide the sand for the hydraulic fracturing operations. We are the nation's largest provider of frac sand. And the reason that we're the biggest provider, you think, oh, well, if they do all this stuff in North Dakota and Texas, why don't they just go get some sand from the beach and use that? You need a very specific type of sand. It needs to be very strong because you're pumping this. Hydraulic fracturing, a lot of people are worried about the water, but the reason that it's not a threat to the water is because this is happening thousands of feet below the aquifer, or the lowest groundwater aquifers, typically. So in Pennsylvania, the average fracked well is about 7,500 feet deep, and the water table stops at 500. So you have a massive amount of rock in between that. So when you have that much rock over the top, you also have a lot of pressure down in that formation. And if you don't have sand that's strong enough, it's going to crush. And when it crushes, you're going to have a whole bunch of those cracks close up because there's nothing holding them open. But that also introduces, when it cracks, it shatters because sand is essentially you make glass out of it. So when it crushes, it shatters like glass. So it has all these small impurities and fines that really kind of gum up the works. And they really you can't use it because it'll make your operation less profitable, actually. So Wisconsin, we got the best stuff. We were fortunate, geologically speaking. Oceans came in and left this sand that's very well-rounded. I mean, this is millions of years ago we're talking. Because, let's face it, nobody's got beachfront property nowadays. So it's very strong, it's made of the right minerals, and it's very clean. So it doesn't have a lot of other minerals in it. So it's quartz sand. So you can have a lot of other kind of, they call them junk minerals, that just kind of get in the way and reduce the profitability of mining it. So Minnesota could also be a large supplier of it. They have a lot of the same sandstone formations, but they've been a lot more reluctant from a regulatory standpoint to permit it, and it doesn't really make sense. So who here has ever seen a gravel pit? Okay. All right. The ayes have it. So really you have the same risks associated with frac sand mining that you do with gravel pits. One of the big concerns is silicosis. You probably heard that word get thrown around, and it sounds really scary because silicosis is a serious disease. It causes lung cancer. But the thing is, you need small particles of respirable silica, which is the dust, what the sand is made of, in order to, over long periods of time, in order to cause a condition like that. So the professions that actually get silicosis are usually construction workers, people that are grinding on rocks and that sort of thing and causing those small particulates. But all the monitoring that's been done by the Minnesota DNR and the Wisconsin DNR has showed that that's not occurring in an environmental level. So there's always an occupational health hazard with anything. Like my dad, he probably gets exposed to silicosis when it's really dry and he's plowing his fields, but that's just a thing. Or he could take his arm off in a PTO shaft. Hopefully it doesn't happen, but it's a possibility. But as far as an environmental health hazard, there's no evidence to suggest that silicosis is going to happen. They also like to throw out water contamination or depleting the water supply, and that's not really an issue either. So when they talk about contamination, they're talking about a chemical called polyacrylamide. And polyacrylamide is a flocculant, which means it's a chemical that's used to take clay out of water. Most municipal water systems use polyacrylamide in order to get a lot of the fines out of the water. Otherwise you're pumping clay through your pipes, and eventually that'll gum them up. But it also contains very trace amounts of acrylamide, which is a neurotoxin. So that's concerning. People hear acrylamide and they get really worried, but they don't understand necessarily the context of it. Acrylamide breaks down in the environment 94% within 14 days. And when you're talking about groundwater movement through rocks horizontally on the order of centimeters to inches a day, it doesn't really present a significant threat to water supplies, which is just my scientific way of saying it's probably not going to happen, but it's still something to be vigilant of. So let's get to the jobs number. They're thinking with the number of mines that have been permitted, there are over 130 permitted mines in Wisconsin now, increasing demand for frac sand. They're thinking they're increasing the amount of sand that they pump down each well by about 30%. So that's going to stimulate a big demand in frac sand if oil prices come back up a little bit. So they're thinking that'll create at least 2,000 jobs. These are usually better paying jobs than the mean income. So I think the numbers that I was looking at previously said something around at least 45 for jobs in this kind of industry. It creates a lot of trucking jobs, a lot of hydrogeologists, reclamation specialists. So it's not just all trucking or people that are working in the mine. A lot of science people as well. And one thing we hear a lot about when it comes to fracking is, well, what about the chemicals? The composition of fracking fluid, which is the water, sand, and chemicals that they use in order to fracture the rocks, is 99.51% water and sand. It's usually about 90% sand, 9.5%. Strike that, reverse it. It's 90% water, about 10% sand, and the chemicals, most of them you can find underneath your sink. And also Baker Hughes, one of the largest oil field companies in the country, recently disclosed all of their chemicals. So people were worried that they didn't know what was in the wells, and now they do. So that's really important. So one of the big advantages of hydraulic fracturing is we're learning how to drill multiple wells from a single pad. So before, we drill one well, drill straight down, get the oil out, move on to the next one. Now we're getting creative. We're snaking these out every different direction. This is a well in Colorado. This isn't typical, but this is really cool. They call it the Octopus. 51 wells were drilled from a single 4.6 acre drill pad. So they were able to get the resources from 234 acres by only disturbing 6 or 7 acres. You know, because you got a road and all that kind of stuff that it's going to be, you know, trucking in the supplies, the water, the sand, all that kind of thing. And in 2011, 83% of the wells in the Marcellus Shale, which we talked about, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, were multi-well pads. So that number is going to go up as long as they can secure the mineral rights. You know, the thing about this is my paper, I published it last year in November. A year later, there's a lot of things that are outdated in it already because the rapid pace that this technology is advancing is incredible. So obviously we talked a little bit about North Dakota. That place is growing like crazy. Pennsylvania has also seen a lot of economic growth. Texas is probably, you know, they have a large economy, but they've been one of the fastest job creators in the country. A lot of that has to do with just people have a lot of money because oil field jobs pay really well. So a major study, mining is also the fastest growing sector of the economy. I don't think that we'd be seeing all the now hiring signs even here in Wisconsin if it weren't for the oil and gas boom. And that might just be my biased opinion, but I think what else is happening? You know, you see a lot of uptick in manufacturing, that sort of thing, and a lot of that's due to low energy prices. Companies are finding that it's more cost-effective to move back to America and take advantage of low natural gas prices, because our natural gas prices are a third of what they were, you know, 8 years ago. So they're finding it's cheaper to come back, pay people good wages, and still take advantage of that competitive advantage when it comes to energy prices, especially manufacturing. Steel plants are moving into Houston like nobody's business, which is great. Hopefully they move back into Wisconsin as well. Great thing is, Milwaukee is still the mining capital of, they produce more mining equipment than any other place in the country. So when you have an uptick and stuff like that, especially the frac sand, lots of production is happening there. They have the Cat D11, which is a huge thing. They have an 8-foot blade on that baby, and they're just using it to pulverize the sand. So yeah, they're looking at by 2020, 600,000 people will be directly employed in drilling for oil and natural gas, 900,000 indirect jobs, so that means frac sand providers, people that are providing well casings, that sort of thing, and 1.5 million jobs just from people in the oil sector spending their money in the broader economy. So I already talked a little bit about the manufacturing revival, but yeah, it's really good for advanced manufacturing. So I don't necessarily think that low-skill manufacturing is ever necessarily going to really come back to the United States. It just seems like it's going to be more cost-effective to do that overseas. But for medical supplies, like I said, steel, fertilizer, that sort of stuff, that could easily come back to the United States due to the lower prices. The manufacturing, the lead manufacturing trade association in the United States believes that hydraulic fracturing alone, low prices for natural gas, is going to create 1 million jobs by 2025, which, holy cow, manufacturing's back. So yeah, I like to call hydraulic fracturing the opposite of outsourcing. Environmental impacts, will there be environmental impacts? Of course there will be environmental impacts. Everything that we do has an environmental impact, whether that's paving a parking lot or anything else. So the thing is, nothing's black and white. You have to trade the costs and weigh the costs and the benefits and make the best of the situation. And you have to ask yourself, can we maximize the benefits while minimizing the risks? And I think we can. So hydrologists, engineers, you know, they're all good at their jobs. State regulators, they need my help every once in a while, but they're usually pretty decent at figuring out what they need to do in order to make sure the citizens of their states are protected. And states are often better regulators than the federal government. The federal government messes up a lot of things. One of those things is the wastewater disposal program that they run that handles a lot of the hydraulic fracturing fluid. EPA said at one point that they didn't update their statutes because it would be too burdensome and not cheap enough. So they said it would be too costly and too burdensome. Like, oh, well, I'm glad states don't have that option. So one more reason to think EPA is overfunded and underperforming. So, all right, so here's how they protect the water supplies. Like I said before, this is happening thousands of feet below the water table, and they're using several layers of cement and steel casing in order to keep that stuff that's coming up the pipes, so the oil and the natural gas, from getting into the water. So what they'll do is, like I said, or like this says here, this is 4 Empire State Buildings. So when you see animations that have water table, then right down here is the pipe, that's not accurate. I've seen some that are particularly misleading, where you have the oil coming straight up into the water table, and people are taking that as granted, which is unfortunate. So there's a lot of engineering practices that go into this, but well casing integrity is an issue. You need to make sure that you have the correct standards and that they are followed in order to make sure that water is protected. All right, so what about Gasland? This is how I brought you all in. You want to know if your water was going to start on fire. In Wisconsin, it's not going to. We just don't have the methane. But why did this guy's... I mean, he looks like a respectable gentleman. He's got a mustache that I can't grow. So, I mean, having water start on fire, that's pretty scary. I wouldn't be pleased if my water started on fire. So, was this fracking? No, it's bunk, is what it is. This guy drilled his well through coal beds. So coal beds are a natural source of methane. So whether fracking was even invented ever, this guy was going to have water, or methane in his water, and he was going to be able to do this. So unfortunately, truth was not paramount. Ratings were paramount when it came to this documentary. And there's a lot of good scientific studies that say rapid upward migration of hydraulic fracturing fluids, which is just a scientific way of saying the chemicals in the water that we're pumping down there. They don't have a realistic way of coming up to the surface unless you have some sort of well casing failure, and in which case you have an operator you can hold accountable. So it's not like this is going to cause a widespread problem. All right, some people have been concerned about the use of water. Hydraulic fracturing uses about 2 to 4 million gallons of water per well, which sounds like a lot, but when you put it in context, everything needs context. It's really not that much. It's less in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. It's less than what's used for other mining, so coal, that sort of thing. Less than what's used for agriculture, and power generation is a big one as well. So recycling the wastewater, so when you frack that well, about 15 to 20% of that wastewater is going to come back up to the surface. They call that produced water or flowback water. So they're developing ways in order to recycle that, and they're also, otherwise they have to, dispose of it in an injection well, which I'll get to in a second here. So they're looking for new ways to reduce water consumption. There's also something called brackish water, which is it's just like very salty water that's naturally occurring deep in the earth. So they'll use that water instead of using fresh water. That's important in places like Texas, where you got a lot of struggles over water. Earthquakes. Just hitting all kinds of fun buttons today. Does fracking cause earthquakes? The answer is probably not. The only times it really has been associated with earthquakes is when they're doing it near a fault line. So sometimes these fault lines aren't known about. So if nothing else, we're learning a lot more about the geology of the country by doing this. And there was a study by Richard Davies, Durham Earth Sciences. He looked at all the cases of man-made earthquakes. Guys, we've been making earthquakes on the planet for a long time. Every time we fill up a well, or not a well, but every time we make a dam, we're putting more pressure on the earth. We're lubricating those plates. There was an 8.3 earthquake caused in China by them building a huge hydroelectric power dam. So everything we do has an impact. So we actually caused a whole bunch of earthquakes in Colorado when we had a military complex that was disposing of wastewater down there. And they called those the Denver earthquakes. That was 1965. So does fracking cause earthquakes? Not really. If they do, they're usually on the order of 1 to 2 magnitude, which means that they can't really be felt at the surface. So hydraulic fracturing isn't a realistic mechanism for causing felt earthquakes, but the disposal of wastewater, on the other hand, can. So, like I said, the Denver earthquakes, they were doing the same thing. So when you have a disposal system, that can cause some earthquakes, so you have to make sure, and that's all very dependent on the local geology. So you can't really have national rules because every place is different. So let's get into one thing that a lot of environmentalists like to gloss over is the fact that we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by producing natural gas. Natural gas produces half the CO2 of burning coal. So in places like Wisconsin, where we get 62% of our electricity from burning coal, you start to replace natural gas in some of there. You'll be actually reducing your carbon footprint, even though I hate that term. I really do. So there's an opportunity there to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm not even sure that that matters, but when it comes to convincing moderates, I like to say it. So I'll wrap up here so we can get to your questions. So when you look at heating bills in the winter, and it's coming, so polar vortexes and that sort of stuff, use a tremendous amount of energy. Having natural gas prices be a third of what they would otherwise be is a huge benefit to the economy. One study by Yale suggests that we're saving about $100 billion a year doing that sort of thing. So that's a lot of extra money that's in your pocket as a result. But it's not just in your pocket. It's in school districts, hospitals, businesses, and that's the benefit of having affordable, reliable energy that we kind of take for granted. This process can be done wrong. You can mess it up. But that's why it's important that you are good about what you do. You follow the regulations that are in place, and everybody can benefit. And let's do it. Question time.
Am I the only one that thinks this or heard this, but we need more carbon in the air, not less?
Oh, yeah. I'm familiar. Yeah, well, there's actually a thing called... now, what do they call it? I was going to get all technical, and then I forgot about it. It's called CO2 enrichment. So the more CO2 that plants are exposed to, the faster they grow, the more efficient they are with their water consumption and that sort of stuff. So, yeah, let's start a 500 parts per million challenge, huh?
Isaac, two questions. One was, is there any way that with the current price of oil from the Middle East, if they start to flood the market with cumulative oil, could that unseat, all the benefits of fracking financially? And the other one is, what about the export of the oil that crude oil we pull up? Is that something that we can do right now? Is that the benefit of exports?
Okay, yeah. Gosh, the first one's $1 million question, because if they did have a sustained low price, you could be looking at some of the oil companies that are operating in the United States starting to pull back a little bit. So the break-even price for fracking is usually estimated somewhere in the $60 to $65 a barrel estimate based on the formation and how good the geology is. So if oil continues to go back down, that's a lot less incentive for those guys to start drilling. And it's not just about how much they're spending in order to produce a single well. There's also research that goes into finding the next field and that sort of stuff. So you will see less investment in probably in production and in research and development going forward if there's a sustained low oil price. There's a really good debate on whether that's going to happen. The Saudis have to keep their production up, like as I was talking to Brian here about, they have a budgets that they've pretty much solely based on selling oil. Also, the developing world, China and India, are using a lot of oil. So there's not necessarily a big glut in the market. Anytime the Saudis pull back, that oil price is going to come back up. So it's a really good question. This could just be an attempt by OPEC to try to rattle investors. I think that's kind of what it might be, but don't quote me. To kind of rattle investment in hydraulic fracturing in the United States by like, oh no, well, is oil going to do the same thing that natural gas did? Because when natural gas plummeted down, it was actually at $2 per million British thermal units, and now it's back up to $4. But it actually crashed below the profitable price in order to produce it because we're like, oh my gosh, we're going to make so much money, and then they overproduced, and it was kind of like a boom-bust cycle right there. So they have people worried that that's going to happen with oil a little bit. I think that's what they're trying to do, but oil's a global commodity, so I doubt that'll happen. Also, exporting oil. We have we have a really unique problem on our hands. The oil that we're getting from North Dakota is a different kind of oil than we're used to processing. So our refineries aren't built to optimize the production of that oil into gasoline and diesel and all of this other kind of stuff. So what they call it in North Dakota is called light sweet crude, which means it has low sulfur and it's really well cooked. So it has fewer impurities in it. So we thought we were all out of that oil. We thought that we were going to have to deal with sludgy sulfuric oil for a long time. So we built all of our refining capacity to deal with that. So now we have this glut of really nice oil, and we just don't have enough refineries to handle all of that capacity at this time. So one thing that would be beneficial, prices in the Bakken, North Dakota, are sometimes $5 or $6 per barrel lower because they just don't have anywhere to ship it in order to get refined. So if you were able to export that oil to some place that had maybe more capacity for light sweet crude, those producers in the Bakken would have more opportunities to sell their oil for a reasonable price. So I don't know. I think that exporting oil is probably a decent thing to do. I would be pretty upset if my dad had a whole bunch of soybeans he was sitting on, but he couldn't sell them to China because we wanted lower prices domestically. So that's kind of my theory on that. But that's all I have to say about that. So, all right.
What's the chances that the federal government is going to try to screw this up?
Oh, God. Do you have to ask?
Well, I think they are.
Right, yeah. So the delayed permits that have been happening, you also have adding species to the endangered species list is also one way that they go about it. The greater prairie chicken, or maybe it's the lesser prairie chicken. I don't care, it's probably tasty, but we can't eat it. They've done that throughout the past. They've said, oh, well, this tortoise needs a place to live, so therefore your oil production shouldn't take priority here. So that's one way. They've also just been really bad about issuing permits. The federal government's looking into duplicative federal regulations on federal lands, so that would cause them to have to get permits from the feds and the states are already doing a pretty good job regulating this. So it's just more paperwork. One estimate I read this week said it would add about $1 million per well, which is a lot, because the capital expense on a well sometimes in the $8 to $10 million range. So if you're adding just $1 million of paperwork, you've got a problem there. So yeah, I mean, the feds are going to do whatever they can. It's really funny. Obama takes credit for the all of the above policy, but he's had very little to do with it. In fact, he's kind of actually impeded it.
How many years could we expect to see the benefits of fracking?
Okay, yeah, for natural gas right now we're looking at about 98 years worth of current supply. So obviously if we start increasing our consumption and we don't find a way to recover more natural gas from the sources that we're using, it'll probably last less than that. They're expecting oil production in the Bakken to kind of plateau. So we'll still be maintaining a really high level of production, but we won't be gaining anymore. Around 20 or 2035, and there's estimates like 2075 we might be looking at starting a decline out there. But when you think about it, 50 years is a really long time. Look where we were as far as technology is concerned 50 years ago compared to where we are. So I think we have a tendency to overestimate the potential downsides of a situation, and we don't really look at, well, 100 years ago we were still farming with horses. My grandpa tells me stories about that. He said they always had one decent horse and an old nag that would die in the winter, and every year it kind of cycled. The one that was decent the year before would turn into the old nag. So they were not very fortunate on that front, I guess. But yeah, we'll be good. Yep.
What type of impacts are the mines having on the state habitat and environment of people?
So the average well is about 4 acres. So that's what they're disturbing.
No, the mines.
Oh, the frac sand mines.
Right.
Okay, yep. So one thing to remember is we've already had a lot of habitat disturbing going on in the state of Wisconsin. It's called cutting down the forest in order to have farm fields. So it's important to remember that we've already altered a lot of our landscape. As far as the mines are concerned, some of them are in the hundreds of acres type of range, but Usually only 30 to 40 of those are open at any certain time, so the rest of it's kind of still available for wildlife habitat. But it's important to remember that this is all very short term. Once they're done mining, they have to reclaim the mine, and that's part of Wisconsin state law. So what they'll do is they'll seed it back into natural prairie grasses, that sort of stuff. So they'll reconstruct the habitat. Badger Mining actually is one of the most fantastic companies. They gave a fantastic talk in Eau Claire a week and a half ago about how they're actually modifying the land to look kind of like it did before. They're not just throwing the soil back on top and leaving. They're doing what they can in order to restore it. As far as the people that are nearby, they're constructing berms. There's all kinds of dust suppression methods that they can use, water trucks, that sort of thing, in order to minimize the impacts. So a lot of times the controversy in Wisconsin about frac sand mining is between, well, if you have sand, you're happy about it. If you don't have sand, you're not happy about it. So unfortunately, that's kind of what it boils down to a little bit. But there are a lot of legitimate concerns when it comes to that sort of thing. I don't fault anybody for being concerned about that. I live right next to the Wapaka Foundry. Well, at least that's where I grew up. Largest gray iron ductile foundry in the world. And if the cows got out, they were on their property. So I don't fault anybody for questioning or wondering that sort of thing. There are more, for me, in my opinion, pressing issues like, well, what is this going to do to the roads? How is this going to impact local governments and that sort of stuff? Because you don't want a company moving in, destroying the roads and leaving the taxpayers to foot the bills. So I think that's really the important issue that we need to be talking about. And unfortunately, a lot of times when you have people talking about environmental degradation, and a lot of times I read one article where they were concerned about by disturbing this land, by creating a frac sand mine, they were going to change the way water infiltrated into the soil, which it will. It'll probably increase the rate of infiltration because you have less overburden in order to hit the water table. But it's important to remember when you build a parking lot, you're essentially sealing off that land from water being able to get inside of it. So a large parking lot probably has a greater impact per acre, per square foot, than a frac sand mine. So when they talk about changing the temperatures for trout streams and all that kind of stuff, I mean, they're very emotional appeals because we like trout streams, we like nature and all that kind of stuff, but it's important to remember that we modify the environment a lot more in different ways that we don't necessarily even think about.
Talking about the Wapaka Foundry, the competition for that.
Yep. Yeah, they were not happy.
I would say they were actually having a hard time getting a permit to get it done. So I mean, it actually can have a negative effect on some of the businesses here. Is there a solution? Is there enough for the foundries to still have? Are there other needs for them?
Right. Well, yeah, we have enough sand. The driftless area of Wisconsin is 10.3 million acres, and they were sourcing a lot of their sand locally. So that means they were finding sand in the, Wapaka County area where they could use. I went to a couple of county meetings, and it sounded like people were concerned about sand if it was used for fracking, but they were not concerned about sand if it was used for the foundry. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, well, if it's going to the foundry, I'm okay with it. But if it's going there, no way, Jose. Which is unfortunate because it has the same effects regardless of where it's being used. So I think a lot of times when people see something having a positive benefit in their community, they're willing to say like, oh, okay, well, we'll accept a little bit more traffic or something of that nature in order to benefit the people around us. Because I live in Wapaka, so if we didn't have the foundry, I'm guessing the hospital wouldn't be there, so my mom wouldn't have a job. I don't think we'd have the same car dealerships that we have. I don't think we'd have maybe even a movie theater. I think we'd look a lot like Wawega. And for someone from Wapaka, those are fighting words. So, okay.
I was down to on the river, a little east of the Mississippi from across down, and there was miles and miles of railroad. And I just assume that that's the transportation of the issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's that corridor is using a lot of oil and sand. One of the ways you reduce the amount of railroad traffic is you build more pipelines, but obviously those have been contested as far as getting permitted by environmental groups and that sort of stuff. And yeah, sand is being mined. I was just down near Lake Pepin, which is right on the border, and Fairmont Minerals has a big processing plant there. So they actually load directly onto the rail cars. So yeah, it's definitely competing with the biggest issue, I would say, when it comes to hydraulic fracturing and, say, agriculture, right? Isn't competition for water or competition for land resources. It's competition for rail cars. It's harvest time, and they want to be able to get that, you know, that grain out of the field, because if they don't, it's going to spoil. But a lot of times there is, you know, all these rail cars are hauling something like frac sand out to the west or the east or wherever they're hauling it, and that actually creates more of a problem than the supposed environmental effect. So it's just we need more rail cars.
When they do permitting for like that octopus mine, you said they're basically on a 6-acre site, but it covers 230 acres? Mm-hmm. For that whole 230 acres, or did they permit for that?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it. So I'll look into it, though. Grab my card afterwards, and we can figure it out.
Will we see gas prices at the pump continue to decline?
Gosh, if the Saudis keep it up, it sounds like they're trying to get back a little bit of the market share that they lost, because we're obviously importing a lot less oil from them. If they decide to flood the market for a little while at $80 a barrel, we can think it'll decline for a little while longer. You know, if oil prices creep back up, probably not. So really, it kind of depends on what they want to do. Do they want to kind of focus on producing more oil at the expense of some of their other OPEC members, or do they want to bring the price back up? It's up to them.
Answering your question, I do believe that they are very fussy with where they're drawing the oil, because I happen to have relatives in North Dakota, and you can't just drill here and take everybody's oil. They go straight to see who owns that land, and they get permits even further out than where they think they're going to leave oil.
Okay, great. I'll be around for a few minutes afterwards. Looks like David wants to kick everybody out of here, but we can definitely talk for a while. And don't forget to grab a policy study. So thanks a lot, guys. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
He impersonates the comedian fairly well.